Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Salesforce Blend webinar, this time with Oda Saver. In this session, we're going to be exploring the importance of tracking changes made in your Salesforce org and how it can benefit the various teams across your organization. We'll be diving into how tracking changes not only simplifies auditing and compliance, but also elevates your data security standing by integrating with tools like AppOmni or DataDog to provide real-time alerts. So by the end of this session, you'll have a clear understanding of how leveraging your Salesforce data history can enhance your business efforts, boost security, and also simplify your compliance efforts. Today, we are joined by Sohail and Tyler. Sohail is Vice President of Product Management, and Tyler is Senior Director of Solution Engineering, both at Oda Saver. I'll be back later for the Q&A, but for now, I will hand over to our speakers to kickstart the session.
Thank you so much. And Sohail and I are excited to present today on how utilizing Salesforce data history can enrich insights, simplify compliance, and strengthen security. I'm Tyler Colby. I'm the Senior Director of Solutions Engineering here at Oda Saver. I'm joined by Sohail. Sohail.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sohail Sheth, VP of Product here at Oda Saver, focusing mostly on our data archiving and data compliance product lines.
Perfect. Thank you. So today we're going to talk about a number of things, but when it comes to Salesforce, we know that more data is being stored inside of Salesforce than ever before. Leads, task emails, cases. And if you see on the right, it crosses a number of different verticals, clouds, managed packages, different functions coming inside of Salesforce. Sohail, from your perspective, when you were looking at data history at a broad level, what did you see the need of Salesforce data history really driving when it came into contact with all of this?
Yeah, good question, Tyler. So I think from a high level, what I've seen and what we're seeing when we talk to a lot of these enterprise customers that we're dealing with day to day is really this shift towards enterprises becoming, or at least starting to seriously think about how to become data companies, right? So you all probably saw this at Dreamforce, where they really push this theme about companies having the right data strategy, being able to win out, and it sort of creates this flywheel, right? Of you have better data, that leads to better results, that leads to more trust from employees and customers, and ultimately that leads to more adoption, right? Which further feeds having better data. So, as you said, Tyler, there's more data than ever before, but a large percentage of companies we're talking to know that their data is not fully accurate, not fully updated, and just not complete. And if you look at a lot of the surveys out there that Salesforce is doing as well, there's, they reflect a lot of leadership anxiety about this particular topic. And when we then talk to customers, it's sort of this recognition that it's not just the data, but actually how the data changes over time, which is becoming a bigger and bigger value driver. And that's what, we're calling data history, as we'll review in a moment here.
Perfect. So as you started to take a look here at data history from a high level, so outside of just the Salesforce ecosystem, what are some of the key things that you're looking at and want to define as data history?
Yeah, so when we talk to customers, I think a definition of exactly what we mean by data history is really important. So I like to break this down into very specific pieces, right? So if you look at the key elements, when we read this definition, right, we say real time, right? So what does that mean? Well, when you're tracking your data, it should be made available immediately after the changes for users to view, to act upon as needed, as we'll see. The second piece is that it should be strategic. So what I mean by that is that, as an enterprise, you need to think about where your critical data, where your sensitive information lies before simply turning on, any sort of tracking solution. So we'll get into this when we look at the demo, but really making sure that that you have filters to track history and data for specific types of objects, specific types of records, even at the record level. Because, simply saying, let's track every change in our entire org, that's not a realistic solution. It's not sustainable, and it doesn't really respect, the compliance and regulatory landscape that you're probably trying to also adhere to. So finally, there needs to be sort of a business goal in mind. So if you have real-time strategic changes, but why are you actually doing it? And the three areas that we've seen is, customers really excel when they're using data history to specifically, right, enrich their business insights, to simplify compliance, and also to strengthen security. So those three pillars sort of drive the entire concept of data history and why we're seeing it more and more.
Excellent. So let's narrow that into Salesforce specifically. When we're looking at data history for Salesforce, what would that mean capturing, and what would I need to store to make sure I have that complete image?
Yeah, so if we go down a level, it's really pretty simple. In the context of Salesforce, it's tracking the old and new values when you have specific fields that are changing, right? And doing that on all types of operations. So whether you're inserting data, whether a user's updating data, or even deleting data, you need to make sure for your mission critical objects that that they're being tracked and can then be used, as we'll see downstream by end users for analytics, things like that. So the other piece to this is ensuring that from a Salesforce perspective, all your field types are being tracked. So, Salesforce has lots of different field types, whether it's, date, number, you get into long text, right? And that can be difficult in a lot of cases, but ensuring that all of this, unstructured text is also being tracked, as that's becoming more and more important for, AI use cases down the road. But tracking all of that, being able to interact with it, roll it back if needed, and then analyze the changes specifically for your critical Salesforce data.
Excellent. So today we're going to cover a lot of grounds, and thank you for setting the stage on where we're looking with data history. So as we go forward here, common use cases is where we're going to start talking through where our admins, security, and compliance teams are going to be intersecting with data history. We'll then dive into the introduction of Odaseva's data history and dive into where we like to look at positioning this within the enterprise. Then Sohail will lead us through a demo of Odaseva's data history, and we'll come back for Q&A at the end. So let's go through some common use cases. As we start looking at the admin and Salesforce Center of Excellence teams, there's a number of benefits across the board within a Salesforce enterprise and Salesforce organization. But building data history is still a challenge. Sohail, there's a number of things here on this page that you had to work through when bringing data history in. Talk to us through not only the journey that a admin might be facing today, but some of the ways that you had to work to get data history functioning at scale.
Yeah, and we don't have to go through all of these specifics, but just to sort of summarize what we're seeing when we talk to customers specifically about data history within the Salesforce context is that really building a complete data history with all of the elements that we described is a challenge. And it's a challenge for three main reasons, right? So visibility, usability, and accessibility. From the standpoint of whether it's a COE or an admin, really these audiences who are in Salesforce day to day, functioning as the central point of contact, right? They're working with different teams who may need this data for different purposes. We've really seen that data history is being used in three primary areas to address right, these challenges of visibility, usability, and accessibility. And we'll take a look at those three areas now.
Perfect. So those three areas, empowering and accessibility, walk us through here, what some of the key benefits are.
Yeah, so when we think about kind of the first one, we're really looking at enriching business insights with this time series data, right? So the insights, they become more, much more rich if you look at the changes over time, of course, right? So you can think about things like customer purchasing patterns, churn risk, lifetime value. These are things that are naturally really need to be analyzed by looking at the changes of different values over time, right? So another popular use case is sentiment analysis, right? That's becoming more and more popular. There were a few sessions at Dreamforce on different ways to achieve this. So as you start capturing, let's say changes in long text fields over time, right, for support cases, or you think about a lot of the unstructured information that can be captured and changed on an opportunity over time. The key is really understanding that a data history strategy creates, exponentially more data. So as a business, you first need to understand what questions you're trying to answer ahead of time so that you can be strategic, as we talked about, in terms of what you want to track, how you want to track it, who you want to allow to access this information, and things like that. So that's kind of that first case. The other, the next case for admins, right? They're always thinking about operational insights, right? So things like platform adoption, system health, which integration users are making changes on which fields, right? Is everything operating properly? Are there sort of spikes or changes in these patterns? Where are we seeing adoption as we begin to roll out, let's say, a new Salesforce app, right? Are there certain fields that are being updated more by specific users? How can we sort of analyze that in a very maybe dashboard oriented way or proactive way, where these insights kind of come to me rather than needing to really, dig in and ask different users and analyze what different users are doing sort of manually. And then finally, we have kind of end user remediation, right? And in making this data history more dynamic. And what I mean by that is allowing users, when needed, right? Not always, but when needed, to interact with these changes. So, often data history is thought about as kind of a one-way activity, right? You're looking at sort of changes at an individual level or across, a broad set of data, but really, it should be interactive and behind all of the standard Salesforce permissioning, right? So if a user has access to edit a field, for example, and they're able to view sort of the changes on that field, there's no reason why, you shouldn't be able to allow them to look through that data history, maybe select different changes across some fields and roll that back, right? If there was an error, or if they notice, right, on an opportunity, it has an incorrect status, being able to see the history of those statuses and in one click roll that back to the right value based on previous changes. That should be something that an admin can be empowered to either do directly, to give permissions to certain users to do, and things like that. It just makes the fact that you're capturing this data history a lot more powerful.
Excellent. One of our next major use cases is enabling compliance. And Sohail, I liked what you said there about strategic implementation. What we have here is a great example of using data history to help meet compliance purposes strategically. So whether this is SOX, Sarbanes-Oxley, HIPAA, FISMA, GDPR Type 20. There's a number of different auditing and compliance regulations that, depending on your vertical, you may now need to take into account when working with your Salesforce data. One of the examples that here at Odaseva we worked with was a very large European retail bank, and they had a requirement around legal hold situations. So whenever a legal hold was identified on a record, we wanted to make sure that we had a full audit trail and versioning of the data changes that were happening. We also then needed to replicate that system downstream for analytics and BI. Sohail, can you walk us through what this looked like? And we have a nice flow chart here, but walk us through what this looked like to implement data history to meet this strategic compliance challenge.
Yeah. So just to go back, Tyler, to sort of what you were saying, I think, we see a lot of these regulations popping up, right? And one of the things that I think is driving this shift, right, is AI, right? So while we might not have specific regulations around AI just yet, it's sort of making it happen, I think, at a more rapid pace, right? So in general, there's a lot more thought into what these regulations are trying to achieve, right? So there's more thought into who has access to data, who's changing the data, really an overall recognition of the importance, right, around data history. And historically, when we talk to customers, it was sort of this kind of push and pull between compliance and innovation, right? So sometimes compliance was looked at as, we simply have to implement something and it slows down the pace of our innovation, and vice versa. So, what we'll see, I think, and what we're seeing now is that's not always the case, right? So data history is a good example, right? So that's something we've seen, as you just talked about with this use case we'll go over, is it's a good example of implementing something that can meet compliance regulations, but at the same time, it's actually driving innovation and allowing the business to answer certain questions. So if we look here, right, we have this global enterprise had lots of different requirements, and it started out as kind of a compliance-oriented challenge, right? And they wanted to achieve all of this not in kind of segregated, disconnected systems where you have different integrations and different platforms, but really achieving this all starting from Salesforce using a single platform. So this is the kind of flow that we're seeing more and more, where in this case it was started with kind of legal driven actions, right? So flagging different records for legal hold, and then you have compliance driven requirements around okay, if this account is flagged for legal hold, we need an advanced layer of forensic auditing, right, for any changes that are happening across all the fields on that account. And then you have kind of security driven requirements to ensure there's data immutability, right? So nothing can be changed once the data is captured. We have kind of an immutable record of those changes. But then finally, there was kind of this recognition from the business that if they're capturing all of this, that we can use it, right? We can replicate it, for example, downstream into our BI tools, and we can start answering a lot of these key business questions. So, I think it's a good example of how sort of a requirement can evolve, right, to handle lots of different use cases, and also to help different audiences across the business.
Excellent. So as we get into that anomaly detection, that leads us right into typically a security ops or SecOps discussion. So as we look at security ops, there's a number of tools that we started to implement, but what were some of the key things that when you were meeting and designing this data history that you were considering in order to enable these security ops teams?
Yeah, I think when we start talking about security ops, we think a lot about anomaly detection, right? So is that, and can that be done sort of visually with dashboards, but also can that be done more proactively, right? With alerting, some sort of alerting framework, notification framework where the right users can be alerted and only the right users can actually see, especially for sensitive fields, right, that they have access to. They can actually see what's happening. So being able to track, across your entire data history, right, anomalies related to a certain person making a change, what kind of operation it was, which object it was on, the exact date and time it happened. And then really you can start setting up your own rules, right? Saying things like, well, if an integration user's month over month update on opportunity records, right, is an outlier by X%, we want this person to receive a notification of changes on, these fields, which are classified as PII or sensitive for a compliance reason, for example. User offboarding, that's another sort of classic scenario we're seeing where you have, it may not just be user offboarding, right? But this idea that you have a set of higher risk users, right? So offboarding is an example, right? Where you need this process to have metrics or an advanced level of tracking for specific users and potentially on specific objects where you really need to monitor what changes are happening for maybe a period of time there. And then finally, we talked a little bit about, integration monitoring or really even malicious actor monitoring, using the information that you're tracking to alert you of potential warning signs, right? And either malicious patterns or other things that are unexpected. So I think at the end of the day, you want to make sure you're able to store, to access, and really utilize the entirety of your data history for security operations as well.
Excellent. So as we start to look at ODA data history in specific, we break down ODA-7's data history into three main functional areas. First is tracking the changes. Second is storing all of those change records. And third is the ability to explore those change records. So when we talk about track, this is extending your ability to track every single change that happens on an object that we deploy data history on. This means that all of your fields, that's your rich text fields, your long text fields as well, can be tracked, no longer limited to either the 20 set history field tracking or 60 that you would get with Salesforce Shield. This is tracking every single change that's happening on that object. Like Sohail said, this can lead to a lot of data expansion. So this creates a lot of data. If you think of all the changes that are happening across your Salesforce org on any particular object, we have here on the screen case. Think how many times a case record can be updated. Changing or storing all that data, and all of that change data is going to first be important that we can scale up. So first managing those billions of records, but then making sure that that data stays secure as well. So ODA is unique in the backup and data management space for Salesforce in that your data is encrypted in a no view status, even to our DBA level. So it is encrypted at rest all the way down to the data level. Very unique there. We even offer a zero trust offering where you can encrypt that data prior to it reaching ODA as well. But ensuring that we can store those billions of records and store them securely so that you can know that that data is safe and secure. Finally, what is data unless we can utilize it as well? So empowering the team with dashboards, analytics. Sohail talked about smart alerting as well. We have a number of ways that your team can then interact with that data, including, if needed, replicating that downstream to BI and analytics pipelines, or for artificial intelligence as well. With that, let's get hands-on with this. So Sohail, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, hand it over to you, and can you walk us through Odaseva's data history?
Sure. Let me share my screen. Should be able to see my Salesforce environment here in a second. There we go. So one of the things that we can look at is just kind of the life cycle from creation of a record by any user in your org, all the way down to how do changes start being tracked, how is data history enabled at the record level, what kind of use cases can that help fulfill, all the way down to, okay, now when this happens millions of times in a day across thousands of different users, what does that look like, right? Because this eventually ends with sort of a need for aggregate level analytics, where a certain audience will need to understand how we can take billions of changes and analyze them in a secure way. So, if I come in here, let's say we'll start with accounts, right? I'm creating a brand new account. We'll set just a few fields here, just keep this simple, just so you get the idea. We'll say Acme Financial Services. We can say this is a prospect for now in the, let's say, finance industry. We'll set a sample phone number, sample fax, and let's set a sample description here as well. So we'll put that in and we'll save it. So we haven't done anything special yet. We've just created an account. There's some fields that have been set. They may be accurate, they may not. They may need to be changed in the future. So now let's say our company's compliance team decides, we want to implement data history, and in talking to the compliance team, we need specific sensitive accounts that fall under legal hold to be enabled for tracking. And what that means is essentially, if we have one of these accounts, if it's under legal hold, we need to make sure from that point on, every single field is tracked and that we can report on it and we can expose this to end users if needed and things like that. So what I can do here is simply go into our data history setup, and it just takes one click. I've enabled account here. I have a couple of other objects as well enabled. But the interesting thing is we can also leverage Salesforce flows and use some of the native functionality that comes with Salesforce to get more strategic about how we want to track. So while we're tracking changes on the account, we can also say that we want to implement as complex really as we want of condition filters, right? Entry conditions in terms of which types of accounts does compliance require that we track, right? Not more and not less. A lot of times you need to be very strategic about the types of records that you're tracking. So in this scenario, pretty simple. We want to say, okay, if a field, if an account is flagged as legal hold, that will sort of trigger this process of data history getting enabled and tracking all the fields. So what we can do now is, let's say we go back to our account and a user starts making more changes on it, right? So one of the things is it gets flagged as legal hold, and now we know all changes from this point on will have kind of special monitoring, and data history will take effect. So we could flag it as legal hold. We could, of course, as usual, some other fields may change as we go. Let's say we have a employee count here, and maybe the description is also changed. So we can go in and say this description isn't correct, exactly. And we remove it and we put in a different description here. So let's save. And what you'll notice is automatically the page has updated and it's recognized now that this account is under legal hold. So anyone looking at this account, the company wants to make sure that they understand that data history is now tracking all the fields. So there's a new component that conditionally displays, and the data history component will show all of the changes to whatever users, of course, are authorized to see it, right? So based on field level security, user permissions, permission sets that you can use to get more granular with who's able to interact with this. So we can already see that the account was enabled for legal hold. A lot of different fields were changed. So now that it's under legal hold, let's say, changes will continue, right? It doesn't mean we're locking the record completely, although of course you could, but rather we want to make sure the compliance team and other teams, especially if there's a court case or some legal proceeding where all of the changes need to be brought in, we want to make sure everything is being tracked. So if we go in and some more fields, again, might change on, hourly basis, however often the account is getting updated, we'll say that changes. And let's say we change the account type again, and the employees has been updated, right? Whether it's by user, by an integration, whatever it may be. And maybe the description kind of changes, or maybe there's even some information removed from the description, whether it's an accident or an intentional change. So once we make those changes, what we can see is I can refresh quickly and we can see every single change across all the field types are being captured. So we can see again the changes that were just made. But now what's important is to understand that certain users, whether they're admins or other end users that have been given the appropriate access, may need to sort of remediate, right? Or roll back certain data, right? When they're looking at this account, they may notice, or they may be in certain conversations and realize, okay, something doesn't look right. Something was accidentally changed. Let me go through the data history and actually see, who made changes at what time. And not only that, but maybe we want to actually change the phone number, right? That was incorrect. So I can now start interacting with this sort of log of changes and audits and change different fields across different transactions. So I can say, actually, this is still a prospect. I don't know why it was changed to a customer. The original description was actually the accurate one that we need to use for our legal proceeding, for example. And then I can actually roll them back with a click, right? So that will allow me to kind of preview what changes I'm making and save that. And of course, when that is saved, that itself is also tracked. So we want to make sure that, okay, we can actually see this user now rolled back some changes and made these updates to the record. So, as of now, we're still thinking about, okay, how do we track things strategically? How do we open this up for admins, for the proper end users? How do we maintain kind of security and permissioning across all of this? But finally, right, we need to think about analytics, because as I mentioned, this same type of change is happening millions of times per day on every Salesforce org. So whether it's accounts or other objects, how do I effectively kind of set up a way to aggregate all these changes? So one of the things we can look at is CRM analytics, right? So if I go into my analytics studio, one thing that we've done specifically to really speed up the pace and kind of lower the time to value that customers can take advantage of all of this data is creating an analytics app, right? So there's an add-on that you can get that allows you in just a couple of clicks to create an analytics app for all of this data. So if I search here for data history, you'll basically see a prepackaged ODA7 data history app, and it will describe essentially what it's doing, which is creating all of the necessary components for you to sync all of this data on the schedule that you need, right? So the recipes, dashboards, data sets, all of the components it's doing for you. So once I install that, I'll essentially get this new dashboard here, right? And of course, this is updatable based on, you know, different widgets that different customers might need for tracking different things. But by default, you can see a lot of granular information across all of the changes. So, you know, let's say going back to, you know, that use case we talked about where I need to see maybe as an admin or compliance or security team, I need to see actually the changes and drill down into all of the changes made by, let's say, an integration user across certain types of operations, across certain objects, right? So you have out-of-box filters for a lot of the key pieces that you'll need to drill down on, right? So let's say out of all our users, we want to find the integration user for now, right? So we can just in real time filter that down, and we can say, actually, we want all of the operations and looking at inserts, updates, deletes. For now, we're gonna look across our 4 core objects here: account, case, contact, and lead. And as far as the dates of all of these transactions and changes, we want to use, let's say, fiscal year to date, previous fiscal year to date, right? So now we can start drilling down and seeing what changes are happening across this time period, whether it's inserts, updates, deletes. We can right away, right, see that in a specific month or two, there was a huge jump in terms of the number of updates that an integration user made. We can further scroll down a little bit and actually see the month over month numbers from an absolute standpoint, from a, you know, month over month percent change standpoint. So just visually, you can start detecting a lot of, whether they may be anomalies or not, it's a lot of insight that can trigger kind of looking even deeper, right? So if you need to do that, you can eventually look at the transaction level, right? So of course we can see, you know, by object, by operation, but depending on what we filter on, we'll see every individual change here that was made. So I'm looking at the integration user. I could quickly just filter in a click on just the changes on the contact object. And maybe I only care about updates, for example. Once you're able to see this, you can even drill into the underlying field changes on each of these, right? So there are quick links here that will take you to a page where you can say, okay, now let me actually see which change this was. What were all the changes made for, you know, this account, for example, or whatever it may be. So very quickly, you can start thinking about analytics and sort of giving more strategic access at an aggregate level to all this data to the right people, right? So the other thing that we talked about was, aside from visually seeing a lot of this, how can we have it alert us, right? So if we're using CRM analytics in this case, we have a notification and alerting structure, right? So I can go into the notifications and say, actually, now that I've seen some of this, I need to set something up that actually alerts me or alerts the right users when, let's say, it's an update operation for cases that an integration user is making, and there's more than, you know, in this case, 9,000 changes, right? So it will evaluate this and proactively send notifications that you can see either here or via email, however you need to do it. So you can use this dashboard as kind of the foundation of building a lot of these different, admin, compliance, legal, audit, security procedures that you'll need once you've started tracking the right data. Finally, the last thing I'll show, which is really cool, right, is Salesforce's kind of AI capabilities and the ability to take all of this data and generate very quickly some models that can output significant sort of changes or deviations, right? So if I go here and we're just using, the discovery model tool from Salesforce, now that I've started syncing all of this data, it can start outputting potential, insights right to me, right? Whether it's based on when changes are being made, the date that changes are being made, the region they're being made from. And if you really need to just drill down and explore a variable in detail, let's say we want to focus on the actual type of operation here. Now we can start seeing, okay, well, when are updates happening? When are inserts happening? Is this actually a significant insight based on sample size? Things like that. So it's really, infinite in terms of what you can analyze and how you can input this into either kind of out-of-box modeling or, of course, downstream as well, right? A lot of our customers, in addition to CRM analytics, have other processes that their data teams have built, and they want to sync this data there as well and start acting on it. At the end of the day, all of this, right, from that first account we created all the way here is meant to really activate your data and your data history specifically. So yeah, that's really it for the demo portion. I think we can kick it over maybe to Q&A now, and we can see if we have some questions that Tyler and I can help answer.
Amazing. Thank you both. We do have a couple of questions that came through. So here, is there a separate app or software for anomaly detection or an app from the App Exchange? And can you name a few apps?
Yeah, so the one that we showed is actually called Data History Insights. So that one is meant to do a lot of what we were showing, right, with some anomaly detection using CRM analytics primarily. There may be some other apps as well. The beauty here is when you start tracking your data history, the Otis have a solution. There are different ways to kind of store it. So you can store that data. Again, as Tyler mentioned, all of it can be stored with Otis as kind of secure, no view provider storage. But there are other ways to store it and also other ways to send that data to, let's say, your data lake, right? And then at that point, there's lots of different apps where you can analyze that data how you need.
Amazing. Thank you. And then another one here. So how do we know when the data is flagged? If two users make modifications after the data is flagged, how can I see the flagged point and revert it back? Is it possible to block users from editing? Where is this history stored? Is it inside Salesforce, or is there limits on which fields we can track?
Yeah, so a lot of questions there. I'll try to kind of take as many of them as I can. So the short answer is yes. So you can decide. There's a lot of flexibility in terms of using flows, as I showed you, to actually decide what is tracked and when it's tracked, right? So there's probably some order of operations here, right? If two users are making different modifications at the same time, they'll be shown. Can you guarantee that one is shown before the other if they're at the same exact time? Not always, right? Salesforce field history is the same way. But within a reasonable kind of seconds or milliseconds, it will show the sequence accurately. You can always revert it back. So in terms of like reverting it back, you can change the fields and it will show those reversions, but you can also temporarily enable tracking, right? So for some use cases, customers will enable tracking on a certain object just for a specific time period and then kind of deactivate it as needed. Is it possible to block users? Yeah, that's just, so blocking users from editing would just be all of your standard kind of Salesforce tools that you have. There are additional permission sets that come with Odaseva data history that govern who can actually interact with the components, who can make updates or rollback changes and things like that. So a lot of that's covered from permission sets specific to the feature. But then, of course, right, you can implement validation rules on that side as well. We talked a little bit about how the history is stored. So it's sort of hybrid, I would say, right? So the primary storage is Odaseva, but there are ways where you can store that data temporarily in a Salesforce custom object, right, that we provide. And that can open up other sort of options and flexibility for, making sure that all of the changes are immediately available in real time, and syncing that to other places as well. So in terms of a limit on which fields, no, there's no limit. So the way it works is all of the fields, and as Tyler was saying, all of the field types, long text, are all tracked automatically once you enable it for an object. What you can do is, as we showed a little bit with flows, is say for certain types of records, we want only to track all of the changes based on, if it's a record type, a custom field, whatever it may be. Even a certain user making the changes, maybe only integration users we need to track all of the changes for, things like that.
Amazing, thank you. And we had a couple come in earlier as well. So how does Odaseva data history help us improve our data governance and reduce risk of data breach?
So I heard a couple of things there. So data governance and data breach. So we talked a little bit, I know Tyler did, about the way Odaseva stores data, but just in general, at a high level, one thing that we always try to preach is thinking about vendor risk, right? So when you introduce any sort of vendor, whether it's for data history, whether they're just connecting to your Salesforce org to extract certain data via an API, the key there is there should be sort of this concept of zero trust, right? You don't want to have to take a leap of faith and just trust your vendor that they're securing your data in the correct way and that they're not doing anything else with it, right? So from the beginning here at Odaseva, we always told customers, like, we don't want you to trust us, right? Because you shouldn't need to. We can literally show you how we capture the data and how we encrypt it, right? We encrypt it and we store it encrypted. There's a 5-layer encryption scheme that we use, so nobody can view the data. Even if you got hold of the database, you would see encrypted data. The customer can own the key. So that sort of takes away this big elephant in the room. But that applies, especially, today with a lot of vendors that are potentially processing data for use in AI applications, right? You want to make sure that at the end of the day, it's safe, your data is safe, accurate, and easy to find, right? And the compliance regulations Tyler talked about sort of serve as a foundation, and they're sort of created to get companies there. But even without that, it's really important to just make sure you have a strategy in terms of governance and data breach risk, right? And a lot of that comes down to zero trust, right? Not assuming that you can trust vendors. If someone did breach your data, do you know what would happen? Are you sure they couldn't access sensitive information? Things like that.
Great, thank you. Any other questions before we wrap up? Fab. Well, I don't think there are any other questions. So any sort of last points to share with our audience before we close off?
Tyler, anything from you?
Nothing here, but thank you everybody for their time, and thank you for learning a little bit more about data history today.
Yeah, really appreciate it.
Amazing. Well, we did actually have one other question that just came in. So how does encrypted data work with Salesforce Shield? Do you have in-house encryption, and can we skip certain fields from being tracked?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say I think Salesforce does a good job kind of balancing for customers out of the box, right? They have lots of solutions in terms of protecting kind of the perimeter, whether you're talking about Shield, Shield Audit Trail, just basic MFA, session security, things like that. But in a lot of verticals and enterprises that we're talking to, they're constantly looking beyond the platform, right? How can we complement, what we have with Shield with an even, advanced level of security? And what that revolves around a lot of times is ultra sensitive data. So there may be some information, especially in Salesforce, right? More and more sensitive information and business processes are ending up in Salesforce. So how do we ensure that for the most sensitive of that information, that it's, for example, encrypted in a true end-to-end fashion, right? So, if you have kind of shield encryption, that's one thing, and you have sort of your standard kind of at-rest encryption, and it protects a little bit from, a database admin or something like that. But when you think about true end-to-end encryption, and sort of a true zero trust strategy, that's very important as well. And yeah, so to answer the question, Otisava does have in-house encryption, so you can actually, I think Tyler, you alluded to this, encrypt specific fields either before they even leave your Salesforce instance and the environment there, before they even make it to any vendor, right? You can encrypt client side and have kind of that true end-to-end encrypted data for Salesforce, which is a very kind of unique and novel concept. And in terms of skipping fields, yeah, you can skip certain fields because the truth is that this really should be for specific fields, right? You don't want end-to-end encryption on everything in your Salesforce org. The processing to do that would be incredible. So you need to understand, usually with kind of flagging, right? Like at the field level, flagging the correct data classification categories, the sensitivity, who's using the fields. As you flag those and your company kind of has a good inventory on what that is, Otisava can use that automatically to kind of provide an end-to-end encryption and kind of zero trust strategy. So yeah, that is something that we do quite often.
Amazing. Thank you. Fab. Well, thank you, Sohail and Tyler, for your time today and for taking the time to answer the questions as well. And thank you, everyone in the audience as well, for engaging, asking your questions throughout. We hope you found this a valuable session. But otherwise, I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.